Oh, hey guys, I was just counting out my 725, which it's 2019, and that is still the federal minimum wage. Regardless of how you feel about the minimum wage, federal that is, there are many pros and cons to both sides. And throughout this presentation, you will see that I find it important you be educated on both the pros and the cons so that you can make a wise, cohesive decision. I want to start this presentation off by congratulating Nani and Freddie for just about completing their grad classes. Everyone else, good luck. You're going to need it. Just kidding. So when I was in college, I worked in Pennsylvania, who still practices the federal minimum wage of $7.25. So freshman year, I got an on-campus job in the finance department and then also in the gym, and I worked for $7.25 an hour for about 2 months before I realized that it wasn't really worth it. Every hour I took home about $5.50, which if you ask Professor Simpson, he would say that's about the price of a terrible cup of coffee from Starbucks. That is completely not worth it. Whether you believe that or not, he's correct that it's about that much. So I would work an hour for a cup of coffee essentially, and I realized that's just not going to work for me, so I got an off-campus job where I could make more than $7.25. Now in Massachusetts, you don't really have that problem. You guys, along with 29 other states, have a higher state minimum wage that's enacted. I believe it's $12 now in Massachusetts, and it's going to increase by $1 each year until it reaches $15, which is where California is currently. So when did minimum wage become a thing? Anybody have an idea? Freddie? Right, 1938. Good job, Freddie. It's almost like you had some inside information there. But no, it's been raised 22 times since the Fair Standards Labor Act in 1938. It's been raised 22 times. And its greatest value was in 1980, according to the purchasing power. And that number is according to a blue class factory worker. So what is the minimum wage, the federal minimum wage, in comparison to what a blue collar factory worker makes? Now in 1980, it was about half, 50%. Now it's about 30%. Okay, so big deal, right? Because how many people really work for minimum wage? Well, it's roughly 1.8 million, and 70% of those 1.8 million work in the service industry. Obviously, we understand that fast food restaurants have the highest workforce for minimum wage employees. So we know of this term called welfare economics. We've heard it. It's the study of the allocation of resources that affect economic well-being. So let me give you an example. In Pennsylvania, okay, if I went to Taco Bell, all right, they had great meals for $4.50. Now in Massachusetts, it's going to be about $5.75. So you'll see the fluctuation in price. It's the same restaurant, the same food. You're just paying a little bit more because they have to pay their employees a little bit more in Massachusetts. Now that would be one of the cons. And so let's talk about pros and cons. We're going to start with the pros. Now, there's going to be more money flowing through the economy if we pay minimum wage workers more money, because a lot of those workers, roughly half, are under the age of 25. So they're going to get the money and they're going to spend the money, most of them before they even get the money. But nonetheless, they know the money's coming, so they push it out through the economy. And so it bolsters the economic stats a little bit. There's also a little bit of a reduced expense for social programs. As you can imagine, if there's a little bit more money, then there'll be a few more people who don't need as many social programs. And we'll get to that in a second as well. But companies would have to become more efficient. If they're paying their employees more, they're going to have to cut costs somewhere else. And also there'll be less turnover, so those employees can get a little bit more training and they can be a little bit more efficient as well. So that's a big thing, because in the service industry, the turnover rate is north of 200% per year. So that means in each position, there's more than 2 people filling it each year. People are working less than 6 months at each job. And inflation. The pro of raising minimum wage is it doesn't match the inflation that has taken place over the last 20 years. And you'll see that because it only has 30% of the purchasing power, as I said before, compared to in the past nearly 50%. So yeah, let's get into the cons. So we kind of know what people that are pro raising the minimum wage have for it. Now, what are the people that say no, that's not a good idea? What are their talking points? The first one is there's going to be more layoffs. Okay, so you can't pay 10 workers $15 an hour, but you can pay 10 workers $7.25 an hour. You'll see the cost is twice as much. If they raised it to 15 in Pennsylvania, the labor costs would just double automatically, and it would be very difficult for them to run. And you'd also see the prices increase, as I talked about before. There would be a lot tougher competition for those minimum wage jobs as well. So it's not just the people with high school GEDs. If you're working through college, or even if you're working on a grad degree, you go work on a weekend for $15 an hour. You put in, 20 hours, and that's $300. That's your car payment for the month. You can just work one weekend in the service industry. So there's going to be a lot tougher competition. As I said before, products would become more expensive. There's no doubt about that. Instead of $9.50 for a Burger King combo meal, you'd be paying $10.50, and at that point you might as well go someplace else. And it also affects the middle class. The upper class doesn't really get touched by too much, but it does affect the middle class, because those are the big population that's spending money at the service products and on the service industry. So the middle class, all those products would come up, and their middle class income would actually decrease a little bit. So if you're taking home $75,000, it's going to feel more like $71,000 or $72,000. Instead of getting that 5% raise, you're really getting that 5% decrease. But the major topic that people talk about when it comes to minimum wage is poverty. Now you think, okay, so a lot of the impoverished workers are working in the minimum wage field in that service industry, right? That makes sense. So if we raise the minimum wage, we would probably decrease poverty. Well, that's not really the case. That's just a misconception. There are 16.5 million benefactors. That's what is predicted to be affected by the minimum wage increase, if it happened, okay? 16.5 million. Of that 16.5 million, only 900,000 are below the poverty level. Okay, so only 900,000 of the 16.5 million are impoverished. And that's according to Forbes, and it's because only 7% of people that live in poverty, families that live in poverty, only 7% of those families have a member that works for minimum wage. The problem, Forbes says, with the impoverished is not that they're working for minimum wage, it's that they're not working at all, or they can't find a job at all. So one solution that has been put forth is, instead of raising the minimum wage, why not just try to create more jobs with that money that we would spend? So if you raise the minimum wage by double in Pennsylvania, wouldn't you just be able to hire twice as many people and train twice as many people with those service projects? So that's one idea, that's one solution. Really, my presentation on minimum wage, though, is just to give you some of those pros and cons, and to help you be properly educated, so that regardless of whether you want to be pro raising the minimum wage or con raising, regardless, you have the education you need. Now, most of us probably in this class would be classified as middle class, so we may not be for it. But some of us can remember back 5 to 15 years or something when we had that job, and how nice it would have been to have those few extra dollars, even though we were going to spend them anyways. Regardless, I just wanted to give you a brief overview. Take a look at the quarters. And I have this sign behind me that says, be thankful regardless, because if you have a job, congratulations, you should be thankful. Regardless of if it's minimum wage or not. Thankfully, we are in grad classes, so we're a little bit ahead of the curve. But thank you for listening. I hope you guys have a great rest of the class. Feel free to stop at your local Starbucks and spend an hour of my work in college. Have a wonderful night. Take care.